here tonight. Thank you all for coming so much. We've been doing a monthly lecture series, and so tonight we've been privileged enough to have Mr. Donald Shomette come. His brother Dale lives in Stratford Harbor, and so thankfully he came to visit, but he's been generous and gracious enough to come and provide his presentation to us, hopefully. If nothing else, we'll be doing hand puppets. He is such a knowledgeable person about the waterways, the Potomac River, the pirates, the sea life, so much. So, without further ado, do you want to give them an introduction about yourself, and maybe we'll finally get this going?
Hi, I'm Blackbeard. Well, I'm not going to talk about myself, but I am going to talk about pirates. And very soon I'm going to need this without you there. And I thank you for all of your trouble.
I broke into your PC here. I did my job.
Well, I thank everybody for bearing with us on this. And I have been in the past, I have been wear a lot of hats, none of which fit very well because I have a very large head and it's bald and everything slips off. So tonight I'm going to be talking about pirates, and I'm not talking about the ones in the legislature, I'm not talking about the ones that are in our town halls, I'm going to talk about the ones who are on the ocean, on our Chesapeake Bay, out in the Atlantic, around the world. Piracy is probably the second oldest profession. And as long as we have been on the water, pirates have been with us. People who are thieves on the water. And before I go any further, I'd like to clarify something about pirates and privateers. Now, everybody thinks privateers are the same thing as pirates, and they're not. Privateers, since the time of Edward I, are authorized by a government under a commission to make war on some enemy wherever it might be. Or in some cases, even companies, like the British East India Company or the French East India Company. And privateers operate under guidelines that are established in the American Revolution. American privateers operated under guidelines established by the Continental Congress. Pirates, on the other side, operate only under their own little codes, and that is for the shipboard guides. Believe it or not, pirates actually did have a code. Many of them did. And so there is a difference. And when I'm talking about privateers and pirates, sometimes they overlap, but not often. So what I'm going to talk about tonight is the pirates on the Chesapeake Bay. And we can go all the way back to early times when we are looking at early history of European history, for instance, or Asian history. Very early on, people go to the water and start stealing somebody else who's going to the water. They go in the water for ships. And what is aboard the ships? And what is a ship? A vessel. It is the largest container that humankind can build to carry something. It's larger. I don't think there's anything larger than the Disney 10,000-man ship that carries 10,000 passengers. The USS Ford, Gerald Ford, I think is as long as the Empire State Building is as tall. So the ship is a container. It carries goods. It opens up shores. It's got a different society. People on board a ship, they have their own foodways. They have their own superstitions. They have their own laws. It's only connected when it comes to shore. So when you're talking about piracy, you're talking about something that is different than it is on the land. The goals are the same. It's not much different than somebody who wants to go into a warehouse and steal some televisions and sells it on the street for 50 bucks. Same thing on the water. Piracy wouldn't exist if there wasn't audiences for piracy. People who would buy what they had all the way up to yesterday. And we still have pirates. Well, the Chesapeake Bay, oh, there we go. The Chesapeake Bay is what we're going to be talking about. We're going to focus on the bay, but I got to go back a little bit, give you a little background on piracy. When we are talking about European piracy, we can go back to the Ionians, to the Greeks, to the Mediterranean. Julius Caesar was captured by pirates when he was a young man. And the pirates, they asked for a ransom, and he paid the ransom. His parents paid the ransom. And he said, you better not do that because I'm coming back to get you. And he did. And he wiped out piracy in the Eastern Mediterranean. So this is something that's been with us a long time. The Straits of Dover, between England and France, a hotbed of piracy, the Baltic Sea, hotbeds of piracy wherever there is mercantile operations, wherever there are ships going. The Hanseatic League in the 16th century was formed in Northern Europe. Specifically, one of the main reasons was to protect the merchants against pirates. So, how does it come to us? How does it come to the Chesapeake Bay? Well, it comes in a roundabout way. Pirates didn't really operate here in the Western Hemisphere with the early American sites, as far as we know. There was warfare, but they were mostly not seafaring people. But when the Europeans arrived, things changed. And what brought the Europeans here? Anybody got any idea what brought Spain?
Ships.
A ship, that's very good. He did not walk. I'm a pirate. So, what brought them here was not anything more than gold. What brought them here were the empires, the Aztecs, the Mayans, and the Incas, all of which had enormous treasures that they had in the Spanish conquistadors. That was their first thing. The gold and the silver of the mines of Potosi in South America, the treasures of the northern coast of South America, emeralds from Colombia, gold from the mountains, etc. All of this made Spain the biggest, most powerful country in Europe for a while. And the Spanish were very good about watching this. Well, when you have that much gold, when you have that much stuff, it's got to be protected. It's got to get back to home. So the Spanish set up a system. Now, by the 17th century, the Spanish are around the world. They're in the Far East. They're sending a galleon a year, the Manila Galleon, which is going all the way up around Japan, around Alaska, coming down the California coast, unloading it on the west coast of Mexico, and going across from Acapulco to Veracruz. Veracruz is one of the bases that the Spanish set up all along their treasure routes. There's another treasure route from South America going up the west coast of South America, carrying the gold from the natives down there in Peru and Ecuador. It's called the Armada del Sur. That gets up to Central America, and they all float on one side and carry it over to the other, to Portobello. South America itself, in Colombia, there are the emerald fields of Maracaibo. There's all types of treasure, and it all convenes. And all these armadas gather, and they go to Havana. And then they go up the coast of Florida, La Florida. the Spanish conquered all of Central America and South America, and they claimed La Florida, which goes all the way up to Newfoundland, according to the Spanish. So they actually laid claim to the Chesapeake Bay. By the way, they were in here in 1588. Actually went all the way up the bay. So when you've got all this treasure, they had to protect it, because the very first thing that happens is the European scoundrels start to descend on the Americas. And why do they do this? What brings them here? The Spanish are really powerful. They've got fleets. They'll send a fleet of 300 ships, half of which are treasure ships, back each year, all the way up that coast, all the way up to the Carolinas, and then east, following the Gulf currents. So, the treasure of Hispanic America is the lure. Unfortunately for the Spanish, is that the European nations are almost all very poor, particularly in Great Britain. The poverty, the wars, the continuous warfare drives many people to seek something else. A number of mariners end up in the West Indies. Now, the Spanish control the West Indies, but very loosely. They're basically on the island of Hispaniola, which is now Haiti and the Dominican Republic. So these vagabonds who start to settle, they settle on some of the islands, and the Spanish try to eradicate them. And they start to form themselves together. And they gather in one force on the Isle of Tortuga, which is off the coast of Venezuela. So when they settled there, the Spanish attempted to wipe them out. It didn't work. They built forts and defended themselves, and they lived off of feral game. And they would heat the game up. They would dry it and salt it and cook it, and it was called bucaning. And the Spanish called them buccaneers. That's where the term comes from. The filibustiers, the people who stole shoes. So this is a thorn in the Spanish back, of course, but the Spanish never eradicate them. And then one day, a man named Pierre, we don't know his last name, he's a Frenchman, one of them. Many people settled, Dutch, French, English, Swedes. Tobago was owned by the Swedes, by the way, for a while. So you end up with this vagabond bunch here. But Pierre one day takes a small boat out with about 10 guys and boards a Spanish galleon with a huge amount of treasure on board. And he captures this ship. Pierre le Grand. He is the example. That's what they call him after that. And all of a sudden, the buccaneers, the filibustiers, decide, hey, we can do that. And pretty soon you've got a problem. Well, in Europe, piracy is, well, they've had pirates, but the British are pretty quick to utilize it for political purposes. Now, we had a fellow named Francis Drake. Everybody's heard of him. He sailed around the world. And he captured the Manila galleon, the Caquifono, off of the coast of Point Reyes in California. And he brings the treasure home to England. And he's a pirate. He's a pirate because he's not operating under commission. When he gets home, he gives the Queen a piece of the treasure. And she says, oh, I knight you. And you get my privateer commission. Spain and England almost went to war over it. But what that did was set the tone. So the British start utilizing, when they can, pirates. One of the most useful of the pirates was a fellow named Henry Morgan. Now, Morgan had a pirate fleet operating in the West Indies. And Morgan, he's crazy, man. He takes anybody on. And he's a good commander. Well, the Queen sees this as beneficial. She makes him the governor of Jamaica. That works. So, for political purposes, piracy actually overlapped what was going on in Europe. Well, about this time, we are looking, or the English are looking, should I say, the English are looking for expansion. And they attempt a colony up in the Canadian coast, and it didn't work. They attempt another colony in Virginia. We all know about Jamestown. We all know the story about Jamestown, about how difficult it was starting off. About how all the lords that came over that didn't want to work didn't do too well, and how the Indians organized against them. It's a wonderful story. It's a great story. But what we don't often hear is what happened during the starving time, when a number of ne'er-do-wells, I will not name them, because some of them went into nobility, end up stealing a ship, one of two that are in the colony. It's called, what is it, Swan? I forget the name of the ship. Anyhow, they steal the ship. They decide that they are going to give this all up because it's going to fail, and they're going to go a pirating. And they sail to the West Indies. And they are as good at pirating as they are at farming. So they go home and they disclaim the colony and saying, oh, it's not going to make, it was terrible, you can't come in. But by that time, an expedition has been sent out and does rescue the colony. But it doesn't end piracy. It's just the beginning, because now the first pirates coming out of the Chesapeake was from Jamestown, but they were in the West Indies. But what about what's happening later on? Well, we get a settlement in Maryland, which is settled by Virginians, not by Lord Baltimore. In 1631, a fellow named William Claiborne, who comes over to Virginia in 1620, and he becomes the treasurer. He's an everything guy. He lays out New Jamestown. He is the treasurer. He runs all kinds of things, and he decides he is going to start trading with the Native Americans up on the Susquehanna, who are trading all the way up to Canada for fur. And he starts trading with the Dutch in Delaware. And so he has to establish a base, and he does on an island up the bay called Kent Island in 1631. It's the first woman in what is now Maryland. It's the first fort. It's the first shipbuilding, the first agriculture, the first fishing, and it leads to the first battle between English-speaking peoples in the Western Hemisphere. Kent Island is settled 3 years before Lord Baltimore gets his charter. So this doesn't set well with Leonard Calvert when he gets over here and settles at St. Mary's City. But the first settlement in Maryland is Virginia. They have representation in the Virginia House of Burgesses. So it was legal in one sense, but his charter was not legal in the eyes of the king, because it was by a signet given to him by a lord in Scotland. So this sets off conflict between Maryland and Virginia, or Maryland and Kent Island. And Maryland fields some boats. William Claiborne fields some boats, and they have the first battle between English-speaking peoples in the New World on the Pocomoke River. They fight another one later on. One side wins one, and one side wins the other. But this goes on, and Lord Baltimore and his side says Claiborne's a pirate. Claiborne is brought home to stand trial in the Admiralty for piracy. He beats it. He doesn't, but he never gets Kent Island back. Well, he does 2 weeks before he dies when he was 72, but it didn't count. But this was coming home. This is war coming into the bay. But it's not long before real war comes in with real privateers. This time they're Dutch, 1665. 1665, everybody is at war with the Netherlands, with 7 states of the Netherlands. And Dutch privateers, a fleet of them, they call them capers. Dutch privateers are called capers. A fleet of privateers came in 1665 and obliterated all of the shipping in the Chesapeake Bay, captured it, took it home as prizes. When the last time, because soon afterwards in the next Anglo-Dutch War, another fleet of ships from the Netherlands, from Holland and Zeeland, a joint fleet comes under a fellow named Cornelius Evertson and another fellow named Jacob Benkies. You don't hear about them in Virginia history, do you? You don't hear about them in American history. They're not in American history books because the English were so humiliated by the defeat that they suffered when these Dutchmen came in and captured the tobacco fleet, went up the Elizabeth River, went up the James River, fought a battle off the York River with 2 British frigates, and captured part of a 100-ship Maryland fleet, and then went on up the coast and captured New York. They brought New York, Delaware, and New Jersey back under the Dutch command, under Dutch government, with government, for 1 year. The Dutch didn't find out about it until the peace treaty had been signed. They had to give it all back. And we know this because we found the documents. I wrote a book about it, which is right up here, called Raid on America. But what about the pirates? We are now looking at piracy really going fast, growing fast in the West Indies. The pirates are not well organized, but they are doing okay. Basically hitting the Spanish. Anybody who's against the Spanish and joins a pirate ship becomes one of the brethren of the sea. You are one of us. And if they capture a ship with anybody other than Spaniards on board, they said, well, will you join us? Well, if not, tough. And throw them overboard, or kill them, or maroon them, or something. But for the most part, it's against the Spanish. Well, there's wars going on in Europe, and one of the wars is called the War of Spanish Succession. And in 1713, the Treaty of Utrecht is signed, and this war was a long, long war. And what it did was create the navies of all the European powers, and tens of thousands of men are recruited in these navies and going privateering. But it's mostly confined to Europe. Well, when the war is over, you have tens of thousands, 50,000 unemployed men in England alone who had been to sea. And there's no work. So in 1715, something happens that changes, that brings everything here to America and eventually to Chesapeake. 1715, one of the great Spanish treasure fleets, which is on its way home from Havana. It's going up the Straits of Florida. And the treasure fleet is stricken by a hurricane, and the whole fleet is lost, along with all of the treasure. And the word is spread throughout Europe of the loss of the 1715 treasure fleet. And when that fleet, word of that fleet reaches Europe, and here's all these unemployed seamen, oh man, let's go get it. It's all in shallow water. We can just swim back and get it. Thousands of men descend upon the West Indies and the Bahamas. New Providence Island in the Bahamas becomes the center point for scores of pirate ships who are going to go steal the treasures from the Florida Straits. Well, a lot of these men are privateers. These guys have been fighting in the war. They know their ships. They know the sea. But they don't know the Spanish that well in the Americas, because the Spanish hold onto their empire for 300 or 400 years, not because they're slackers, believe me. The Spanish are really, they know what they're doing. And they send guard ships out, they protect what's out there and try to salvage it themselves. They have fortifications all over the place, so it's not so easy. So the pirates start looking elsewhere, and they start looking at ships of all nations. You don't have to be Spanish anymore. You can just be anybody. And they start capturing them. And they migrate up the coast. By 1717, there's no fewer than 20 pirate ships operating from South Carolina up to the Chesapeake. And everyone is afraid. Everyone is afraid. One pirate ship was run by a fellow named Benjamin Horningold, who was a privateersman. And his number 2 is a guy named Edward Teach. Edward Teach, better known as Blackbeard, is his acolyte. Now, I have to talk a little bit about pirates themselves and their lives. Most pirates are people without any pedigree, without any birthright, without anything. They usually from the lowest class of humanity, which in those days was basically the common seaman. If you went to sea, you had a 1 in 7 chance of dying at sea per year. 1 out of every 17 ships that left England in 1750 did not come home. It's a dangerous, dangerous operation. So piracy had its benefits. When you become a pirate, many pirate ships had their code of conduct. They had their own insurance program. If you lose an ear in battle, that ear is worth so much of the treasure that's on board that you captured, for the booty. You lose a leg, same thing. If you die, if you're married, it goes home to your wife. Believe it or not, that is verified fact. So piracy did have its benefits, because if you become a pirate and you are successful, then you capture treasure, or you capture something that is for sale. That is worth it. Piracy paid. And there were more pirates that made it that didn't make it. So piracy did pay, and that was the attraction, because if you go to sea any other time, it was, the captain is your dictator. He is everything. Whatever he says goes. And cruelty and punishment on a common merchant ship, not to mention the navies of the world, was horrific. You could leave the ship anytime you want and not come back. You could branch off. If you capture a ship, sometimes they would say, okay, you guys can have that one. So being a pirate did have its benefits. And so in 1717, there is this plague of pirates, and it's moving up. Blackbeard is the epitome of pirates. Blackbeard ruled simply by fear. Some people say he was 6'6", which was huge in those days of men who were 5'2". He was voracious. At one point he made his base on Ocracoke Island down on the Outer Banks, and he went into business with the governor of North Carolina, Robert Eden. And Eden was taking the booty on one side and gave him free rein on the other. Well, England was really bereft by what the pirates were doing. And they sent a fellow named Woodes Rogers, who had been a privateersman, to put an end to it. And Woodes Rogers comes over to the Bahamas, and he overcomes the pirates there and says, okay, we will give you amnesty. We're not going to hold you responsible for murders, thefts, or anything else if you forego your career as pirates. And many, many took it up, including Blackbeard, but he didn't follow. But Woodes Rogers, he was knighted. He wasn't much better than a pirate himself, but he becomes a knight, and it looked like piracy might be on the descendancy. But then there's Blackbeard, and then there are other folks who are inspired by him. One of the fellows who's inspired by him is a fellow named Stede Bonnet. Now, Stede Bonnet was a planter, and he'd been reading about the pirates and all this stuff, and he said, you know, I want to do that. Now, he was kind of a dandy. He wore a suit, you know, kind of like me. He decided he's going to go pirating, but he was the most unpiratey guy you can imagine. He bought his ship. He didn't steal it. He advertised for a crew to go pirating. You know, what the newspaper. And he paid him a wage. And he was as bad at pirating as he was at everything else. He was not a success in anything. And he ends up getting a ship with a load of peas that were bad. He was a terrible pirate. Well, Blackbeard and Stede Bonnet cross at Ocracoke, and Blackbeard likes his ship. Bonnet's got a really nice ship. Blackbeard's got a little crummy ship. And Blackbeard has captured some good ships. One of them sank. But he likes Bonnet's ship, and he says, come on board, let's talk, man. Plies the guy with rum. Bonnet getting drunk. Blackbeard says, you know, I think your ship's not as good as mine. You want to trade? You're okay. So Bonnet and Blackbeard trade ships, and Blackbeard gets a ship called the Adventure. Well, this is following a whole series of pirate raids into the Chesapeake. Major pirate battles. In 1699, the pirate fleet came into the Chesapeake under the command of a pirate named John James. And he was known as the pirate with the golden toothpick. Now, you know what a toothpick is? We all know what a toothpick is. You know what a toothpick is, right? But if you got a gold one hanging from your neck with a golden chain, that means you are the Spanish admiral of a fleet. So that was given to the commanders of the homeward-bound pirate fleets, treasure fleets. John James came into the Chesapeake Bay, which by then had a guard ship called the Essex Prize. James comes into the bay with his pirate fleet, 7 ships I think it was, and he's going to raid the Chesapeake Bay. Well, he's got 3 golden toothpicks around his neck, which means that he's captured at least 3 admirals. Well, Essex Prize is commanded by a fellow named John Aldred, and he is a political appointee, and we all know how some political appointees can operate, not too effectively, but he sees the pirate, and he takes off. Get me out of here. So John James does what he wants in the bay, he gets his supplies, and so forth, and he leaves. In the following year, another pirate comes in with another fleet of ships in 1700. His name is Louis Guillard, and he had been a planter in Barbados, who one day was out on his own little boat, and he's captured by pirates, and the pirates said, well, will you join us, or do we maroon you? And he said, well, I'll join. Well, he works his way up, and he becomes captain of the ship. And then he captures a ship, a French ship, a Dutch ship, I'm sorry. and he renames it La Paix. It's peace, ironic. And he sails north, and he's going to come into the Chesapeake Bay. Well, Captain Aldred had been replaced by another fellow named John Passenger, and a much bigger Royal Navy warship, HMS Shoreham. The pirates came into the bay. Shoreham had just arrived. Captain Passenger is having a dinner with the governor, Governor Francis Nicholson, and his comptroller, a fellow named Peter Hammond. And the word comes in, he just arrived, and the word comes in, the pirates are in the bay. Passenger jumps up. The governor says, I'm coming too. Comptroller says, I'm coming too. And they board the Shoreham, and they go out to single-handedly take on the pirate fleet. The Shoreham takes on La Paix, and it is like a scene out of a movie. Two frigates fighting each other to the death. And finally, Governor Nicholson is standing there. He is standing beside Passenger, firing his guns. The comptroller is standing there and gets hit in the head and dies. But it's a life and death battle. And the battle goes on until finally Louis Guillard, his ship is shattered. He says, we will surrender, but we will not surrender and be tried here in Virginia. Because if we are, we know what's going to happen. We want a real honest court. So the governor says, okay. And they surrender. And they send him home, and it's the largest pirate execution in British history. The Limeburner's War. So this goes on. This is a constant. Many privateers, many pirates, but none really grabbed the American public today as Blackbeard. So, back in the 1950s, Walt Disney made a movie, Treasure Island. I think most of you have probably seen it. And Robert Newton played Long John Silver. Well, Robert Newton was an alcoholic. And they had a hard time getting him on the set to do his scenes. And he would swagger out there, and part of the swagger you see when he's walking along is because he is loaded. Well, he comes out one day, and he is supposed to read his lines, and he says, "Arr!" And that's where the term comes from. Pirates never said that. It comes from Walt Disney. But Blackbeard, back to Blackbeard here. Blackbeard was a misanthrope. He was everything that you can think bad of a person. He married 7 times without bothering to divorce his wife. And after his last marriage to the daughter of a merchant from Edenton, North Carolina, after the wedding night, he walked away and he told his crew, he said, "She's yours now." That's the kind of guy he was. But he was fearless in battle. Well, in 1717, in the fall, his base of operations is on Ocracoke Island. And he is threatening the shipping coming out of the Chesapeake Bay. So the governor of North Carolina, of course, is in cahoots. The governor of South Carolina has been playing with the pirates. The governor of Pennsylvania is in cahoots with the pirates. The governor of Virginia is the only honest governor of all. Governor Spotswood, he's kind of a dandy. But he says, we got to do something about this. And they got 2 ships, 2 British warships in the Chesapeake Bay, up in the James River. And the Lime and the Pearl. And the captains of those ships says, well, sir, you know, we could go after them, but we can't get through Ocracoke Inlet. Anybody here's ever sailed through Ocracoke Inlet? You know how shallow it is and how it migrates? Well, there's a little hole just to the north of it. It's still called Teach's Hole. where Blackbeard kind of kept his boat, the Adventure. And Governor Spotswood says, well, I will pay out of my own pocket for someone to go down and take him if the Navy will do this. So the oldest lieutenant in the Royal Navy decides he is going to take him up on it. And he ends up taking two ships, two sloops, Jane and I forget what the other one was. They end up going down because they can get through the inlet. They go down and they sail right in against blazing cannons because they don't have the cannons. They're going to board the pirate. They board the Adventure galley. They board the ship and they have hand-to-hand fighting. And John Maynard, the oldest lieutenant in the Navy, he's kind of a slight fellow, but he's a fighter. And he takes on Blackbeard man to man. Blackbeard's arm is a windmill. He's got a brace of pistols. He's vicious. He's maybe 15, 20 guys on his crew, and Maynard's guys are about the same. They board it by fooling the pirates by having everybody below deck and sail straight to them. They boarded the pirate ship, surprised them, but the battle is one of the bloodiest for its size ever fought in the Chesapeake Tidewater region. And this is done at Ocracoke, but I extend that. So this is one of the bloodiest battles, and Maynard is down on his knees, and Blackbeard is about to bring his windmill down, and he's shot half a dozen times and stabbed. And he's still doing it. He's still going on. And then just as he's to bring it down on Maynard and cut his head off, he drops dead. Maynard cuts his head off and puts it on the bow of the Adventure and takes it up to Hampton Roads. And it was mounted at what is now Blackbeard's Point in Hampton, not far from Peter Hayman's gravesite, which is still there. And they are mounted there as a warning to all pirates. Don't come here again. Well, Spotswood receives word that many of the pirates out there that are still out there are calling for his head because they took the king of the pirates. Now, he was upset because the pirates actually had a conclave on Ocracoke Island. A fellow named Vane, another pirate. It's the largest gathering of pirates in the Western Hemisphere ever on Ocracoke Island, which is why he went down to sent troops down to, sent Maynard down to try to break it up. So the word is out, we got to get Spotswood. We got to get the governor of Virginia. We got to take him down. And the word is out, and Spotswood is supposed to go back. He's supposed to turn over his command of the colony to another officer. And he stays in Virginia for 3 years, 4 years, because he is so afraid of the pirates. Until finally, the nemesis, the chief nemesis, is captured and killed. That was called the Golden Age of Piracy. And very soon after that, Daniel Defoe writes a history of the most notorious pirates. And that history is written under a nom de plume, Captain Charles Johnson. His book is still in print. I have 2 copies of it. But he writes about the golden age of piracy. He doesn't write about a lot of the things that happened because piracy didn't die. Piracy didn't go away. Piracy thrived soon afterwards in the Chesapeake Bay. Pirates started to gather on Deal Island. They gathered down on Goldsboro Island. They gathered on Sharp's Island. They gathered and they raided the tobacco operations. Tobacco is gold. Virginia and Maryland are the two richest colonies in North America because of tobacco. Tobacco, that's a deal. The tobacco fleets get raided from time to time. Maryland tries to stop it. Virginia tries to stop it, but they never do. There are women pirates. There are pirate families. There are black pirates. In the American Revolution, privateering, loyalist privateering from the Eastern Shore, or commissioned ships by the Royal Navy, operated by locals, were carried out, raids were carried out in the bay off and on throughout the Revolution. Privateer battles. One big battle was fought off the mouth of the Patuxent River between the Felicity and the Antelope. It was a massive battle. So all of these things continued on. But when the Revolution was winding down and the Loyalists were being expunged, thrown out of the colonies, many of them stayed around. And they stayed around to become pirates in the bay. And Maryland and Virginia both had state navies during the Revolution. The Virginia State Navy, I think, was third in size to the Continental Navy, second in size to the Continental Navy. First in size was the Pennsylvania State Navy. Maryland was fourth. And what they were doing was trying to keep the lid on the Chesapeake. Well, when the war was over, those navies, of course, were closed down. And the upshot was that piracy continued. Penny ante stuff, not big, small guys going out in their little sloops, little schooners. Nothing big. So finally, the United States Navy is establishing bases north of Baltimore, Annapolis, and it kind of disappeared until 1807, when the last act of piracy occurred in the Chesapeake Bay. The piracy in the bay in 1807 wasn't expected. England is at war with Napoleonic France. The French fleet, the English fleet, both of them are massive fleets. A squadron of 3 74-gun men of war are chased by a squadron of British warships, and they entered the bay in 1806. The largest of the ships was called Le Patriot, and she was commanded by a German named Hyacinth Kroll. Now, the United States was neutral. Thomas Jefferson was trying to keep us out of the war. He said, we're not going to build a navy, we're going to have gunboats because we don't want to patrol our coast, but we don't want to get involved in Europe. So we didn't even have a navy to speak of. And so we've got 3 74-gun men of war, each with about 800 men on board. They're in a neutral port, in a neutral country, so the British can't come in and get them. They blockade the Chesapeake Bay. One of the ships goes up to Annapolis and lays anchor in Annapolis roads. One of the ships stays down off of Hampton. La Patriot anchors off of Drum Point in the Patuxent River. And they're there for a year. Well, in August of 1807, everybody knows what August is usually like in the Chesapeake. Well, when you're on board a 187-foot-long vessel with 800 men, it's a little warm. Well, all of those ships would send boats out to the local ports to get supplies for their men, and they had been doing it for the year. And La Patriot sent a ship up, a schooner up to Baltimore, a small schooner, to get supplies. Well, the men on board the schooner decide, we've had enough of this. This is not for us. We're not going to stick this out. Hey guys, let's go up pirating. They get to Baltimore, and they're not very good either. Like, they're kind of like other folks. They get to Baltimore, and they buy a ship. It's a schooner, and they name it General Messina. And they decide to go pirating down the Chesapeake Bay. And they sail south, and off of Sharp's Island, which doesn't exist anymore, it's underwater. At that time, it was about 800 acres. They come upon a ship that was coming in called the Othello. It's an English ship carrying winter goods that are going to be sold in Baltimore. England and the United States are still trading. So they come upon the Othello early in the morning. The captain of the Othello, a fellow named John Glover, he's awakened by gunshots, and he's being boarded. And the pirates come on board from the General Messina. You are our prize. And he says, wait a minute, you guys know what you're doing? This is Chesapeake Bay. There's a French fleet down there. There's a U.S. Navy warships in Hampton Roads. There's Navy ships in Baltimore. There's a French ship up in Annapolis. You guys can't get out. Oh my goodness. Okay, how about we give you your ship back and everything's the way it was? And Glover, of course, says, yeah, okay, that sounds good. So Glover immediately sails for Baltimore, and the word's out. There's pirates on the bay. So, militiamen in Baltimore, the Sterrett brothers, who become very important in the War of 1812, defense of Baltimore. They raise militia guys, and they take a boat called the Volunteer, arm it, number of cannons on board, and they sail south. In Annapolis, the French said, they can't be our guys, but if they are, we're going to get them, we're going to kill them. And they send some boats out. In Hampton Roads, Captain Barron on, I think it's the Enterprise, comes up. He set sail to capture him. So you got 3 forces coming in on this little pirate ship. Well, the pirates have decided in the meantime, maybe we can go back to La Paix and nobody's going to know the difference. So they go back and they come to and they anchor right off of La Paix under Drum Point. And a number of them take the small boat and go on board the flagship. And the other ones are still on board when Volunteer arrives. They have the last pirate fleet, a pirate ship to ship engagement in Maryland history. And the pirates, of course, flee. They don't wait to be captured. They go ashore, and some of them went into our county government. This is not what you would consider, and some people consider, the end of piracy. I do. But after the Civil War, a new form of piracy began, and that was over another form of gold called oysters. And in 1870, oyster fleets of 300 vessels are sailing, both from Maryland and Virginia. Ultimately, there will be over 1,200 ships picking oysters off the bottom by the 1880s. And they are scraping the bottoms there. Whole patches are being cleared. And the governments of Maryland and Virginia create navies again. They're called the oyster navies. Maryland and Virginia don't really care for each other because Maryland stayed in the Union and Virginia didn't. And the upshot was that there was a great deal of hard feelings and not a few gunshots. The Maryland Navy is carrying cannons. They're carrying rifles, pistols. The pirates, the oyster pirates coming up from Virginia, or the Maryland pirates going down into Virginia. whichever, going down to the Rappahannock or going up off of the Kent coast or wherever the patches are at the time. Gun battles royal, are fought. In 1870, a Virginia oyster fleet came up and started raiding the grounds that were owned by Marylanders, or chartered, leased by Marylanders, off of what is now the Patuxent Naval Air Station. And a steamboat that had been hired by the Maryland government and armed sets sail from Solomon's Island and goes out among those 100 ships. There was 100 by the time it got there. And they have a little battle. And they capture the Virginia flagship. And they bring him into Maryland. And they take him to the court, Prince Frederick, Maryland, and said, okay, you're going to be charged. He got a fine of $25. Oh my God. Well, that didn't sit too well with him. And the next night, he brought his fleet into Solomon's Island and burned the oyster canning factory there. Burned it down. So this was the oyster wars, which is a little different than piracy. Well, the oyster conflicts have not ended. We all know that. There's still some problems with the diminishing supply, and few watermen out there. They have a hard life too, by the way. So this is the end of the Chesapeake story. But is piracy gone today? No. In 2013, the UN did an assessment of pirate actions around the world. They came up with a number of 2,113 acts of piracy off the coast of West Africa, East Africa, the Indian Ocean, the Straits of Malacca, the South China Sea, the southern coast of Brazil, one act in the West Indies, and in the Pacific Northwest. Piracy is not dead. When Somali pirates attacked American ships, however, we responded. Off the coast of Somalia, they captured a ship. The U.S. Navy, under the President's direction, went out and stopped it. But piracy is not dead. Piracy is the second oldest profession. And it will continue as long as there is someone who will buy what they capture. So I thank you for your attention, and I'm sorry that we didn't have the pictures.